All right, good evening, my friends, and a good moed as well. We are on Hey Ahmed Aleph. We are on 5A. It's good to see you, Lloyd, Judd, Toby. Who else? We have Jake, Gloria, Bubby, Artem, Erwin, and Arthur. Welcome, my friends. Okay, so Hey Ahmed Aleph, 5A. We actually went a significant amount down the page already, uh, over a quarter way down, actually, almost halfway, actually. The line we're up to is Bishlama Aron Tisha. So I would venture to say it might even be the next page, the second page in the art scroll. Someone can give us a verification on that when you have a chance. But while you're finding the place, let me just give a little bit of background to where we left off. And actually, what I'm going to do is, give me 1 second. I have my microphone here. So I've listened to a few of the recordings. I've seen that the audio quality has been very dismal. I had a hard time listening to myself. So give me a second. I'm just going to plug in the audio here.
Rabbi, what was the line you said you're starting on?
We're starting Bishlama Aron Tisha. It's a lot of lines down. I can't even count it. If you see Rashi Dibur Maschel Tachshin,
It's still 5A in the art scroll.
Oh, still? Okay. All right.
Anyone.
Can you hear me better now, guys? Just curious.
Yeah.
Yeah, quality's better. Okay, good. So I brought my microphone. I realized that for these classes that are only on Zoom, I should make sure to have good quality for them at very least. Okay, here we go. So what are we reviewing? So our review is as follows. We were trying to determine, we said a sukkah has to be a minimum of 10 tefachim tall. And we said that's actually a rule in Kol HaTorah Kula in general. Now, where do we get this idea of 10 tefachim, 10 hand breadths? So we got this from the Ark of the Covenant, from the Ark itself, the Aron. And the Aron is 9 tefachim tall because it's amma v'chetzi. It's an amma and a half, which is 9 tefachim. Where do we get the 10 tefach from? From the kapores. And the question that we're going to ask right now is, Bishlama Aron Tisha. I know that the Aron measures 9 tefachim. Dechsiv vasu Aron atzi shitim amasayim v'chetzi archo v'ama v'chetzi rachbo v'ama v'chetzi komaso. So it tells me its dimensions are an amma and a half. El kaporas tefach minalam. But where did I get the idea that the covering that goes on the ark measures at 1 tefach? So that 9 plus 1 gets us to 10 tefachim. It doesn't give us that explicit dimension in the Torah. Fair enough? Okay. Where do we get that from? So let's take a look. The Tani, we're basically going to give 2 possible ways to derive this. One attempt, it'll take us a little bit of time to settle on it, is going to be from the Shulchan, from the Miskeres, its own little border that it had around the table. And actually, since I have the Mesifta with me with the pictures in the back, instead of making us use, I'm sure, our very capable imaginations, why don't I show you a picture of it so that way we can all visualize for ourselves. All right. So here we are. Here's the Aron. Hopefully you recognize that from Indiana Jones. I was obligated to make that joke. And if you look over here, the Aron, you'll see there's this little border going around here. That's the Miskeres. And that's going to be, we're going to posit in a moment that that's 1 tefach, akin to the kaporis, which will be 1 tefach as well. Okay, and then the other solution we're going to give in the latter half of the Gemara is that we're going to derive it from the fact that it says al pinei hakapores. It uses the biblical language of a face, and we're going to figure out that the average measurement of a face for these purposes is a tefach. So, okay, and you're going to ask me, wait a minute, right? I don't think I have the biggest or the smallest head out there. clearly, and you're just looking at my my fist over here. My head's bigger than a tefach. So how do we figure that out? We'll get there. Okay, so here we go. The Tani, Rabbi Chanina, Kol Kalim Sha'asa Moshe Nasdam Hen Torah Midas Archad Midas Rachman Midas Komasan. So in general, whenever the Torah outlines the measurements of something in the Mishkan, it gives us the width, length, and the height. Kapores midas archa midas rachba nasna midas kamasa lo nasna. However, when it comes to the kapores, it only told me the length and the width. It didn't give me the height of the kapores. So how am I supposed to figure this out? Seilaman mipachu shebe kelim. So we go to our lowest common denominator of kalim in the Mishkan. Shenemar vasisilo miskeres tefach saviv. So the miskeres, which again was that border, unless there's a more accurate term that ArtScroll is giving you, the border that goes around the shulchan, the table in there in the Mishkan, so that measured a tefach. Ma lahalan tefach, avkan tefach. So we can infer that by default, if we're not being given a particular measurement, we settle, and we'll see this more explicitly in just a moment, we settle on the lowest common denominator. And since we know that the miskeres measured a tefach, so too we assume the kapores, if we're not being given information, it also measured a tefach. V'neilaf mikalim gufayhu. So why don't we actually learn from actual kalim in the Beis HaMikdash? Why are we, which are bigger? Why are we going to this very small miskeres? So the reason is tefasta meruba lo tefasta, tefasta mua tefasta. This is a very important concept. This is a Shas concept. So if you're taking notes, you'll want to remember this idea. It's a very important principle. And in fact, in rabbinic jargon, it gets used a lot as well. So again, tefasta meruba lo tefasta means if you try for too much, you grab for too much, you're going to wind up with nothing. If you grab for a little bit, you'll wind up with something. And Rashi elaborates on this. It's similar to, I'm not sure if others mention this, it kind of reminds me of the negotiations for Yavna. Okay? So Yochanan ben Zakkai, when he's negotiating with, I believe it was Vespasian, they asked him, well, if you're good at negotiating, why didn't you ask him to spare Jerusalem? Why did you only ask him to spare Yavna for the sages and everyone to flee to? So he said, if I asked for Yerushalayim, he would say, no, I'd wind up with nothing. So let me compromise and ask for Yavna. So it's a similar idea that when we don't have an indication one way or the other, we err on the side of caution and we go for the lowest common measurement because that we're safe with. We don't want to overreach for something that we might not be entitled to. So again, that's the idea. Without an indication to go bigger, we go with the lowest common denominator, and the lowest we know of is the miskeres of the shulchan, the border of the shulchan. However,
the shulchan is really tiny.
What? You're right. So the question was, so if we're going for the lowest common denominator, we could go even smaller than the miskeres. V'neilaf meets tzitz. Why don't we learn from the tzitz? We actually just came up in our actual Parsha Monday night class. I think we did this recently. So right, the tzitz is what the frontalet that the Kohen Gadol wears, and it says Kodesh Hashem on it. So that is just let me see if I have a photo in here, just again, so that we're not having to use our imaginations. Right here. All right, this is the tzitz. That's what the Kohen Gadol wears on his forehead. Okay, I'm sure we've seen pictures of it in the past, but there you go. So why not from the tzitz? The Tanya tzitz domek min tes shel zahav. It's a plate of gold. Rachav beis etzbaos. Now the key detail here is that the width. It's confusing because width means height for these purposes. It's length versus width. So it took me a while. I had to read it over a few times. But the width, because the smaller measurement is going upward, right? It's a like a rectangular shape. So it only measures 2 finger breadths. Where do you put the S at the end of it? Finger breadths. It only measures 2 finger breadths, and which is smaller than a tefach. Remember, a tefach is a fist. 2 fingers is smaller than a fist. But now that we're citing this teaching, we're just going to finish it up. Umukav me'ozen la'ozen, it goes from one ear to the other. That's how far it goes. Uchasal beishitin, one tradition teaches us that there was 2 lines. Yud Hey, the tetragrammaton, Yud Kei Vav Kei was on the top. Gamala, Kodesh Lamed, and it said Kodesh with the letter Lamed was Milamat on the second line. From Rabbi Eliezer Bar Rav Yossi, Ani Re'isi Baromi, I was there in Rome and I saw it myself. Ukasav alav Kodesh Lashem Bashita Achas. And there was nothing crazy going on. It said in one line, Kodesh La Hashem on it. Okay? That machlokas aside, the point being is, we see clearly that tzitz is one of the things that we find prescribed for the tabernacle, for the Mishkan. And it is smaller than a tefach. So if our whole entire principle is tefasta meruba lo tefasta, that we should take the smallest measurement by default, we could go even smaller than a tefach. So why don't we do that? So one suggestion, we're going to have a little bit of ping pong over here. Done in klimi klive, done in klimi tachshit. We can derive the measurement from one kli to another, but not from a tachshit, not from an ornament. The tzitz is primarily an ornament. It's not a kli, it's not a utensil. So it doesn't make sense to derive measurements from a kli, from a tachshit, from an ornament. V'neilav mi zar, damar mar zar mashir. Now what's the zar? You look at Rashi. Rashi tells us, Shel Aron o shel Mizbeach o shel Misgeres, that on top of the Misgeres and on top of these different items in the Mishkan, they had like this little crown work, which was ornamental in nature that went around. It does not give me a specific photo to show you, but you have to take my word for it, and that is certainly smaller than a tefach. So done in kli mi kli, being done in kli mi hechsher kli. So the rule is that we derive one measurement. We can compare and contrast 2 utensils, but not from a hechsher kli. What's a hechsher kli? A hechsher kli is kind of just like the extra stuff that you're putting on top of it. You know where else we've seen the term hechsher? Just I know a number of you were with us back in the Makos days. So here's a little bit of a throwback. Remember we talked about a mitzvah versus a hechsher mitzvah? So there's a mitzvah, for instance. Here's a good example. I have a mitzvah to eat matzah. I don't have a mitzvah to bake matzah. Baking matzah is a hechsher mitzvah. It's a means to getting to the mitzvah of eating matzah. The reason you and I can just order matzahs and don't have to bake them is because there's no inherent mitzvah to eat matzah. There's only, no inherent mitzvah to bake matzah. There's inherent mitzvah, though, to eat the matzah. This came up in Makos when we're talking about Sukkah. There's a mitzvah of yeshiva sukkah, that one should dwell in their sukkah. But they're, right, actually connects beautifully because we're Masechah Sukkah right now. But there isn't a mitzvah to chop wood for building the sukkah. So remember, we learned way back in Makos, we learned that if someone commits what we termed, the lawyers told me, negligent homicide. Someone kills b'shogeg and accidentally kills someone. He's a woodchucker, not woodchucker, what do you call it? Lumberjack out in the forest and accidentally kills someone with the axe or with the wood, depending how you learn it, as he's chopping wood. So we said the reason that you are held liable is because you are doing what is called a dvar reshus. It is something voluntary. However, if you're doing a dvar mitzvah, such as the executioner in Beis Din, the shliach Beis Din, then you do not have to go to galus if you accidentally kill someone while you're performing a mitzvah. And in that Gemara we mentioned that so the question is, well, maybe the case in the Torah is you're chopping wood to build the sukkah, and that's a mitzvah. And we said, no, chopping wood is a hechsher mitzvah. It's a means to an end of having a sukkah that you can dwell in. But the chopping of the wood itself is too many steps removed. Same kind of idea over here. There's a hechsher kli. There's what is inherently the utensil, and then there's kind of like the fancy ornamental things that you put on top of it. So that's called the hechsher kli. So just the same kind of language being used over here. Again, this hechsher and tuma, it comes up everywhere. Okay, I thought tie that in because we're in Maseches Sukkah anyway, right, guys? All right. Now, I got so taken by all this that I have to find the place again. That's what he said. So ihachi miskeres nami hechsher. Well, when you think about it, isn't the miskeres, isn't that border around the table also not inherently part of the structure? Meaning, wouldn't the shulchan itself be able to stand without the miskeres going around it? So the answer is it depends. Miskartu lamata haisa. So if you understand that the miskeres was actually had a functional purpose in the shulchan, it held up the table itself. So then it makes sense. It's not just a hechsher kli; it's an intrinsic part of the structure. The whole table would fall apart without it. Well, the issue is hanich lamadamar miskartu lamata haisa lamadamar miskartu lamalo haisa ma'ika lamemar hechsher klihu. There are some who understand that actually the miskeres just went, there was a table, and then we put the miskeres on top of the table, and it was purely ornamental. And just again, so it's easy to visualize, this would be kind of showing what it would look like with the table going on top of the miskeres. So if you see the photo, hopefully it helps. If you don't see it so well, you'll just you'll take my word for it, okay? Take the Gemara's word for it. So what's the answer finally? Why are we able to derive from the miskeres of the shulchan itself? What's the issue with the tzitz? Where did we learn the measurement of the width of the tzitz? We learned it from a brisa. We learned it from a rabbinic tradition. We don't actually know it from the Torah explicitly. And likewise, the same thing for the Zar as well. We have a tradition. We said, Amar Mar, Zar Mashahu. It's a little bit. But if we're trying to infer a concrete measurement, we have to work with what it actually says explicitly in the Torah. And what does it say explicitly in the Torah? The smallest measurement that we have is a tefach. And so therefore, just the maskana in this part of the Gemara is that just like the miskeres of the shulchan was one tefach, we can extrapolate that the kapores, the covering that went on top of the aron, on top of the ark, was also one tefach. And how does that help us again? Because we know the aron is 9 tefachim on its own, plus the kapores, which is one tefach, that gets us to 10 tefachim, so we can know that the minimum measurement of a mechitza, of a sukkah, and in general, is 10 tefachim. So that is the conclusion in this section of the Gemara. We're going to give an alternative way of how we figure this out, but let me just pause here and make sure we're clear on this, that we don't have anything leaving us confused before we go forward. Any questions? Okay. I said there's a little bit of ping pong. Oh, is that Uncle Heshi over there?
Yes, it is.
Oh, good to see you. Okay.
Hi, Masha.
Oh, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Good to see you. All right. So, our goal, if you remember, was to figure out how do we know that the kapores equals one tefach. So far, we have one suggestion. We learned from the miskeres of the shulchan, from the border going around the table. Here is another way we could figure it out without having to resort to making this whole entire inference of tefast, murbalut tefasta from the shulchan. Here we go. Here's a completely separate suggestion, seemingly not mutually exclusive. Rav Huda Amar Mehacha, al penei hakaporis kedma, ve'ein panim pachos mitefach. It uses the language when it talks about pouring. It's pouring on the penei hakaporis, the face of the kaporis. And what do we know? The Torah is very deliberate about using the language, the face of the kaporis, ve'ein panim pachos mitefach. And we know, in general, that there's no such thing as having a face that is smaller than a tefach, okay? That is a general rule. But whose face are we talking about? Ve'ema, turning to the next amud, ve'ema ka'api debar yochani. Rashi tells us this is an of gadol, huma'od. This is a huge, very huge bird. I'm not sure exactly what kind of bird it is. Maybe in art scroll they tell you what kind of bird it is, but it's a huge bird that has a face that I guess is bigger than what we have. So maybe that's the kind of face the Torah is referring to. So we bring back our very important principle: tefasta berlo tefasta mua tefasta. We again resort to the smallest common denominator. Okay, well, if you want to go small, I could go even smaller than a tefach. I'll find you a little bird with a very small, right? Think about a pigeon. A pigeon has a face that is smaller than a tefach. I'll find you a really small bird with a really small face that is smaller than a tefach. So why are we assuming that the kapores is a tefach because it says penei, it has a face? So Amar Rav Bar Yaakov Rafuna penei gamar. So where does he figure it out from? So it's actually a gezerah shava, right? Remember, guys, gezerah shavas. That's when you have two words, same word, two different places. And what it does is it creates a wormhole between one idea in the Torah and the other idea in the Torah, and it allows us to transfer ideas back and forth, that they will share similar parameters. So ksiv hacha al pnei hakapores. So again, in our context, it says al pnei hakapores. Uksiv hasam says meis pnei Yitzchak aviv. So use the language of pnei for Yitzchak. So we're not talking about a big bird from Sesame Street or small birds. We're talking about a human face. It says Pnei Yitzchak Aviv. We see that a face in the Torah refers to a human face. Oh, but is that true? V'neilaf mipanim shel mala d'chsiv hiros Pnei Elokim v'titzani. So we see that Pnei could also refer to the face of an angel, which would definitely confuse things in terms of measurements. So again, tefasta merlo tefasta mua tefasta. We go again with the smallest common denominator we are aware of, and that still would be a tefach for a human. And how do we? But then we ask, v'neilaf mikruv d'chsiv al kaporis yu pnei hakruvim. Why not infer from the kruvim? From the remember the two angels that are on top of the Aron? They have faces also. And those are smaller faces. So Rav Bar Yaakov, Gemiri ein pnei kruvim pechusin mitefach. Rafuna nami mehakal kamer. How do we know this? We have a tradition that the faces of the kruvim that were on top of the Aron, on top of the ark, their faces were not smaller than a tefach. Okay, so ultimately, at the end of the day, we have a gezerah shava of a face to face. We know that the face of the kruvim were at least a tefach, so we know that the kapores is at least a tefach as well. And now, just to wrap up, the Gemara parenthetically wants to know a little bit more about the kruvim. So you can think of this as a parenthetical. My kruv, what is a kruv? Aravavo karavya, shekebavo accordingly new karavya, like a child. The kruvim were two in the faces of children. Amarle Abaye, I believe it's from Yecheskel coming up. Yeah, from Yecheskel. El me'atad d'chsiv pnei ha'achad pnei ha'kruv pnei ha'shei pnei ha'adam. When he's describing that creature with the multiple faces, so one had the face of a man, one had the face of a kruv. Hainu kruv, hainu adam. But if you're telling me it's a child, what's the difference between a kruv and a man? They're both human beings. So if you api raverve api zutrai. One has a big face, one has a small face, one has a face the size of a tefach, one has the size of a regular human being. So again, in the end of the day, we have determined, my friends, that indeed the kapores was one tefach, whether we learn from the skeret to the shulchan, whether we determine it from the kruv, we know that's a fact. So the kapores is one tefach, plus the Aron that's 9 tefachim, that gets us to 10 tefachim. That's when we know a sukkah is indeed 10 tefachim. Very good. Any questions? All right. Shkayach, everyone. Thank you for adjusting your schedules, and we'll pack in some more lumdus, God willing, next time. I have an interesting chashuki chemed that I'll just, I'll share the question with you, and then we'll answer, God willing, beginning next time. Rav Zilberstein asks in Chashuke Chemed, this is kind of going back to the previous sugya. So we learned that kind of anything, the schach has very strict parameters in a sukkah. But in theory, anything can form a wall. A human being can help form the wall of a sukkah. So the question is, what if you have a breach in your wall on Shabbos or Yontif, and you want a human being to stand in there and bridge the gap? Would that be an isser of creating a mechitza on Shabbos and Yontif? And then there's a question, what if someone else wants to take his place? He needs a bathroom break or something. And there's a question, if he's at the wall, can he also eat? Is he considered inside the sukkah that he can eat? So those are a few questions I'm just going to raise. You can think about it. And then God willing, at the beginning of next year, we'll provide an answer to that. Sound good?
Sounds kosher.
What was that?
I said, sounds kosher.
Well, we'll find out if it's kosher. All right. Wishing everyone a good moed.
Actually, I have one question though. After
kosher v'sameach for the last days of Yontif.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, good to see you, Uncle Heshi, and the whole family.
Same likewise. Well, could you just sum it up again? So you're saying you're learning out from the Kruvim?
That's the second limud. The first limud is from the Miskeres of the Shulchan.
But you're trying to learn out 10 Tvachim altogether?
Yes, we know already the Aron already says in Torah explicitly it's an am and a half, which is 9 Tvachim. Right. So we just need to figure out that the Kaporis is 1 Tefach. So we had two possibilities, either Miskeres from the Shulchan or from Gzer Shava of Panim, of the face, and we learned from the face of the Kruv.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. There's a summary. All right. Everyone. A good moed. Good seeing you.
Good moed.